Hi there guys, and welcome back to another video of myself, Harlequin Dusk. Just a quick disclaimer before I begin. In this video I'm just going to go over the basics. This tutorial is by no means exhaustive. There's plenty left for you guys to discover in your own time. Rise is a complex game. It would be insanely difficult for me to run through every aspect, synergy and strategy with you all. So don't worry if you've discovered things that I haven't mentioned here. It is by design, and it leaves the magic of discovering the game of Rise TCG for yourselves. With that being said, let's begin. In the last Rise tutorial, we talked about summoners and the importance of leveling them up to utilise their potential. Originally, in this tutorial, I was only going to talk to you guys about creatures and doors, but I swiftly realised that to talk about these cards, I'm going to need to explain about the stock and the ether. I then thought about how these affect almost every card in the game, so then I needed to introduce imminence and incantations alongside this. Then how these lead back to stock and ether, and then into creatures and imminence, then stock, then creature and ether and stock and blah, blah, blah. It all started to spiral into some form of vicious circle, and well, to cut a long story short, today we're going to look at, bar the summoners and level ups discussed in the previous tutorial, all the card types in Rise. We're going to go through their meanings and mechanics and how they interact with each other to give you guys a rudimentary understanding of how your cards, and by extension your deck, will function on the board or mat in a game of Rise. So let's get cracking and kick this tutorial off with one of the cards I've just mentioned, stock. Stock is essentially your bank where all of your coins will be held ready for your use and frequently generated. There are multiple cards in Rise which generate coins or multiply any coins generated. I'll let you guys discover these for yourselves, but your stock is one of the consistent generators of coins throughout every game of Rise, and it works like so. Every cycle, at the beginning of your turn, your stock determines how many cards you may draw and how many coins you'll automatically generate as a result. Well, you make the choice, your stock just gives you the options. As you can see here, you can either add one coin to your stock and draw 2 cards to bolster your hand, or, conversely, you can decide that you've got enough cards and would rather take the cash, so would generate 2 coins and draw 1 solitary card. 2 incredibly simple options to choose from, but these are crucial to understand as they open up your game and strategy to varying degrees of flexibility and control. It also states on the face of the stock card that you start the game with 1 coin which you can either spend or build upon as your game progresses, but this is just a friendly reminder. It's important to remember, however, that in the current standard format, which is currently the only format for playing Rise until new ones are developed, a player can accrue up to a limit of 30 coins in their stock. So as a general rule of thumb, it's always good to be generating passive income every turn you can via any and all means necessary to keep your coin levels as high as humanly possible. At this point, you're no doubt wondering where you'd spend all these coins just squirreling away, and why you'd want coins at all for that matter. Well, let me explain. A vast amount of cards in Rise possess certain powers outside of the basic attack and defense values, which are referred to as actions, effects, and abilities. Effects and abilities we'll come to shortly, but for now, we'll focus on actions. You can ascertain an action based on the fact that it costs a coin value or hinges on a coin flip to activate, as highlighted here. Flat coin costs are very simple. Pay the amount shown and boom, you've got your action. Coin flips, however, are not so simple. Most come with a success condition solely, which, as I'm sure you deduce for yourselves, gives you access to described action as a result of the successful flip of a physical coin. Some also offer fail conditions, which can have varying degrees of connotations for your game, from slightly affecting your sequence of play for a turn to absolutely clearing your entire board and giving your opponents a huge advantage. So be very careful when flipping for big results, or, at the very least, have measures in place that can guarantee the outcome of a flip. More on that in my next video. Coin flips can also cost a coin fee to activate, so once again it is critical that you are gaining coins as efficiently as possible through any and every means necessary. I cannot stress this enough. So you can utilise your actions as much as you could ever want or need to during the game. And possibly the most important thing you need to remember is that actions can be activated at imminent speed. This means that as long as you have the coins and your creature, incantation, or whatever is untilted and available on your battlefield, you can play an action on yours or your opponent's turns whenever you like. Big power. Well, potentially. So, now you know about actions and the stock, how these two are intrinsically linked, and why you would not only want, but fundamentally need coins to get the best from your deck. Before we move on to explaining the creature cards which will populate that battlefield, there's another power which features heavily in the game, which you also need to know about. Abilities are many and varied. Some are basic and simple, others are complex. The main differences between the other powers in Rise and abilities are that they don't usually have a coin cost, even though a whole bunch do have coin flips to determine their outcome, and they aren't unique to any specific card. As such, instead of having explanations and definitions of each ability printed out and clustering up every card that has them, Rise has ability icons as shown here. In the current alpha iteration of the game, there are just shy of 50 abilities, which may seem daunting at first. There's so many, and the majority of cards have multiple abilities. How could you possibly learn them all? Well, rest assured, the learning curve is nowhere near as steep as it may first seem. For the most part, when you construct your deck, you will know exactly what you're looking to do, and will have a good grasp of what your cards are capable of. On the flip side, if you're just starting out, most precon decks will utilise only a few of the myriad abilities out there, which can either be researched for yourself on the Rise website, which I will link in the description below, or your opponent will be kind enough to explain it to you, given they are trustworthy enough. There are plenty of resources, player created and otherwise, which you'll have access to give you all the information you need. But probably the most important thing to know is that the more you play the game, the more you'll recognise the ability icons, and before you even know it, you'll be able to identify your advantage from your assimilation at a glance. So with that being said, before we move on to creatures, I should probably introduce you to the final power in Rise, the effects. Effects are probably the one power that really need minimal explanation. Straightforward and easy to comprehend, effects come into, well, effect when they're played or whenever it is stated on the card itself the conditions for their activation arise. It's quite literally as simple as the old TCG adage, if in doubt, read the card. You can identify an effect by the lack of a flip or coin cost, and they appear as a sentence that describes what they do. And that's it. There are no common themes to warrant icon usage as per abilities, then there are no coin costs, well, unless stated, which come as standard to activate them. They are simply just that. Simple. However, the havoc they may wreak on your opponents is definitely not something to be sniffed at. So, now you know all the powers that you may see on your cards. Let's have a look at the cards themselves. In this segment, I want to talk about the layouts of the cards of Rise, mainly so we can start to understand the key aspects of the game and how your decks will be formed. Here, you can see a particularly nasty card, a straightforward troll card if there ever was one, where the caster has nothing to gain except enjoying watching the annoyance on everyone's face around the table. It is, of course, Oknar's Orb. Now, I've chosen this particular card not only to demonstrate how you can mess with your opponents, but because it demonstrates a number of factors which you, as a player, will need to know going into the game. Let's start at the very top of the card. This portion of the card is to designate which card it is, the type of the card, and what rank it is. Starting with which card it is, as you can see, Oknar's Orb is an amalgamation of 3 different cards: creature, incantation, and imminent. You can also tell which card it is by these icons in the corners at the card's border: skull for creature, 8-pointed star for incantation, and a lightning bolt for an imminent. With Oknar's Orb, you can see the combination of each of these icons in one, which look pretty awesome to be honest. Anyway, creature cards are your front line in Rise, forming the fighting units which not only attack your opponents but will also block incoming offensives. They may possess the abilities, actions and effects I described earlier in this video, but fundamentally they also possess the attack and defense values found at the bottom right of the card's face. I will go through the phases and how a game progresses in my next video, but for now, all you should bear in mind is that the higher values trump lower ones. There are also doors which behave a bit like permanent blockers with their own powers depending on which door you may choose to open, or use should I say. Doors can be opened and closed with the varying degrees of effects, but a basic door premise is if it's open, it cannot block. Closed, it can. But you can look at these interesting items when you peruse the card list for yourselves. They also come with their very own symbol, a lock in a wooden slatted door. Again, very cool. Incantations come into play and don't leave unless forced to, granting access to actions, abilities and effects as and when you may want or need them. Some of the best plays in the game come from synergies between incantations and other cards, so make sure to check out exactly what you're filling your deck with and be sure to bolster it with appropriate incantations, plus incantation removals for your opponents. Imminent cards can be used at any point in the game, including your opponent's turn, provided you have the summoner to tilt and the cap to spend. These can be utterly devastating cards, countering opponents' plays or wiping clear entire boards. But they can also be helpful, healing and buffing as and when you may want them, and even resurrecting dead summoners. The Rise world is your oyster, so to speak. So now we've worked out what card it is. Next is the card's type. In this case, this is a divinity type card. There are multiple different types, monsters, skeletons, angels, to name a few, but it's also good to be aware that powers can target certain types as well, and cards can buff them too. The next thing to talk about are ranks. Ranks in Rise TCG dictate the limits of how many of that particular card you may have in your deck. Ranks 1, 2, 3 and 4 are pretty self-explanatory. Rank 1, you can only have 1 in your deck. 2, 2, 3, 3 and 4, of course, 4 cards in your deck. However, there are also rank infinite cards, which tie in very closely with the ether card, which shall be explained in the next segment. But more importantly, there are rank infinite creatures. As the rank name suggests, you can have as many rank infinite creatures in your deck as you would like. I wouldn't recommend it, mind you, but the real glory of rank infinite creatures are the fact that they can be summoned from outside your deck, rather than having to invoke them from your hand. Take Oxo the Cat Owner, for example. You can invoke Oxo, and as soon as you do, you summon a rank infinite cat, which comes complete with its own little ability icon. Oxo is also furnished with a 1 coin cost flip action to generate a rank infinite cat, plus a buff for every cat you have in play. And he's not the only one. There are rank infinite creatures for a bunch of different types, as you can see. The point being, with rank infinite creatures, you can include them as part of your 50 card deck, but as long as you've got a way to summon them via summoner or incantation or any other means that arise, you shouldn't need to. So, let's get back to Orb. Aside from the obvious title just below the typing of rank and the beautiful artwork itself, here we come to the first effect. Notice how there's no cost, it just outlines exactly what happens when the card is played and thereafter. Below this effect, there is a great example of a flip action. In this instance, there is no coin cost to flip, however, there is a fail condition alongside the success, which I'm sure you can see, means that there's really no upside to being the controller of an Oknar's Orb. Below the third and final effect, which finally allows you to relinquish yourself of the orb's burden, there's some delightfully positive flavor text. Flavor text is not on every card at all, it's just there on certain cards, just to add, as it says, a little bit of flavor. Most crucially, in the case of creature cards, however, we can find the attack and defense values next to the obligatory sword and shield icons. With one final huge act of defiance, which just puts the icing on the cake for Oknar's obnoxious orb, it has no attack power, but 9 defense, making this nigh on impossible to destroy on the battlefield, at least until later in a game. There are of course ways around this, but if you had the thought, well, it's just a creature, I'll just attack his controller and surely they'll block with the orb to get it out of the game, think again. 1, it isn't that easy to destroy, and 2, why would your suffering opponent, who's just had the adverse effects of the orb for themselves, want to deny you this pleasure, when they can attempt a destruction before their own turn? It really is a card to bring out the sadist in a player. Speaking of card destruction, where do they all go? When a card is destroyed or removed from the battlefield, invariably they will end up in your cemetery. This card zone on your game mat is by no means final. There are plenty of cards that can return things back from the grave and bounce certain imminents or incantations back into your hand from your cemetery. In no deck is this more prevalent than the one using skeletons. With Lazarus, the King of Rebirth, himself as one of your summoners, you'll be trying to summon as many creatures and invocations as you can back from your cemetery. The Exclusion Zone is exactly that, a place where your cards are essentially outside of the game and not returning. There is one card in the whole game that can return them, but I won't be telling you which one. You'll have to find that out for yourselves. But aside from this, and for the most part, the Exclusion Zone is pretty much the black hole of Rise. Once a card goes in, it doesn't return. There is a notable exception to these areas of destruction, the Ether card. Snuggled in next to your stock, and thus completing our lovely vicious circle, this place is where all of your rank infinite creatures and equipments will go once they have been destroyed or removed from the battlefield. Instead of taking them off to be buried alongside your Ultra Laser Unicorn or excluding in limbo with that vacuum cleaner from hell you just bumped off with Alchemist for the coins, they become ether charges, which as you can see become very useful in a couple of different ways. Drawing a card or gaining a coin for every 3 charges you wish to spend, this is pretty nifty, especially when spamming the board with as many rank infinites as you can. At least your cannon fodder are generating some nice little benefits as they inevitably succumb to your opponent's onslaughts. And there you have it. To quote an amazing film, the circle is now complete. You should now have at the very least a basic grasp of how your cards appear, where they go and how you can utilise their effects, actions and abilities effectively. The only thing left to show you guys are the phases of play and how an actual game looks and plays out, but that's a tale for another day. I hope you enjoy my name ramblings as much as I enjoy spouting them. This game is phenomenal and I absolutely love it. The efforts going into it to make sure the May release deadline is hit is gargantuan. Please drop a like and subscribe if you feel like it. There'll be more Rise TCG videos on the way over the next few weeks to wrap up this tutorial series. But anyway, that's enough from me. Take care guys. Bye bye.